Tory manifesto announcement comes today. The Liberal Democrats came yesterday. We'll certainly be catching up with what is in it later with Natasha. We may dedicate the next hour of the programme to one of the things that came out in yesterday's Liberal Democrat promises, pledges, proposals, policies, whatever you want to call them. I'm particularly drawn to the idea of cannabis shops opening up on British high streets. And it occurs to me, not for the first time, that we haven't really kept a proper eye on what's happened in other territories where that has already been done. But we begin by looking at other territories. Do you know, one of the most gratifying moments I've had in this studio was in the aftermath of the 2016 referendum, when I thought somewhat, perhaps ambitiously, I genuinely wondered whether we could do a show, and I'm used, as you know, you're used to it as well, to having a switchboard that groans under the weight of people hoping to contribute to the programme. Not every day. Some days you're looking for very specific responses to a very specific question. But generally speaking, there's a sort of warm glow of security and comfort that overcomes a radio phone-in presenter when he is spoilt for choice on people phoning into the radio. And I wondered whether we could actually fill up a switchboard with people who weren't in this country. I wanted to find out what we looked like, particularly in the context of Brexit, to people listening elsewhere. And I was so amazed by the response, I even took a photograph of it. I think I perhaps posted it. And ever since then, I've been aware of the privilege of talking every day to people who are way beyond the environs of these islands. Although we talk chiefly about domestic politics, some people, of course, have an interest in the broader sweep of politics beyond their own country. Some people are expats, or immigrants, as we'd call them if the movement had been in the other direction. Some people are living overseas and keen to keep in touch. Quite a lot of listeners in Australia, would you believe, who probably fall into both categories. And then, dare I say it, there might be some people who just enjoy our company every day and find it preferable to whatever is on offer in their home countries. And it is to you that I speak today. It is to the people of continental Europe, as I suppose we call it now, or the EU. It doesn't quite cover exactly the same territory that we turn our attention this morning. And there are two reasons for it. The first is that the results in various elections in 27 EU states have been interesting. They're not quite as seismic as some people either suspected or indeed have reported. The centre has held, but if there's not an actual eruption, there are certainly shockwaves in place as voters supported parties that are, I think, reasonably described as far right. And that's the thing that stopped me first. You know, the memories of the D-Day commemorations are still fresh in our memories and were still fresh in the memories of people, particularly in France and Germany, who made their way into the ballot box and cast votes for parties that are closer to the far-right history of continental Europe than the other alternatives on that paper. And it's an unhelpful phrase in some ways, because the umbrella under which all of these far-right parties sit is almost too huge to contemplate. For example, Marine Le Pen's outfit, which is no longer called the Front National, it's called something else these days. I'll remember what it is called in a moment. But they have cut off some contact with the AfD. Those are Nigel Farage's friends in Germany, because one of their senior politicians talked about the SS in fairly warm words and talked about how they're not all National Rally, of course, the Rally National it's called, talked about how they're not all criminals and should be sort of a little bit of historical revisionism in the case of the SS, which should get you a column in Andrew Neil's Spectator magazine, but is still considered to be beyond the pale by the far right French party. So that they've sort of ceased contact. But the AfD, who are riddled with Nazi legacy. I think, wasn't the woman that invited Farage to address them a few years ago, wasn't she the granddaughter of a senior Nazi? And in the week that we commemorated D-Day, people are voting for these parties. What do they have in common? Well, that's quite easy, actually. What they have in common is that they insist that reducing the number of foreigners or minorities in a country, in a nation, in a territory, would make it better for everybody left there. It would make it better for everybody else. Where that umbrella once again becomes enormous is that they don't actually agree on which minorities should be discriminated against. It's why Islamophobes and anti-Semites can often seem to be at loggerheads with each other when ideologically they're more or less identical, of course. But what you could loosely describe all of these parties that are on the march as believing is that we need to get rid of, well, first of all, we need to stop so many foreigners coming here. Indeed, possibly we should stop all foreigners coming here. And second of all, of course, history has taught us that can move fairly quickly into getting rid of the ones that are already here. So if you are deporting asylum seekers today, then perhaps you will be deporting first generation, second generation migrants tomorrow. And that desire, if you like, is always under the surface. And there it is, really. There is the mystery. I mean, you can't really describe these parties as anything other than anti-migrant. And history's taught us that the tougher the economic situations may be, the higher the cost of living. Rassemblement national. Forgive me, my French translation there was wrong. Rassemblement national. Merci, Oli. They are anti-migrant parties. That is all that they really have in common. Historically, far-right parties then move into things like the sexual autonomy of women. They may be looking at religious freedom. They may be clamping down on media and judiciary. You don't need to reach far into your memory banks to find British politicians attacking judges or even attacking opinion pollsters. The idea of fascism is that you control everything. You are completely in control of everything. And yet it starts off with anti-migrant sentiment. So there are two questions here, really. The first is, in the context of D-Day celebrations, how can so many people in Europe have voted for far-right parties this weekend? And if you are there, obviously in these countries, you'll be particularly well placed to answer these questions. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And then if we want to introduce a domestic angle to it, why is this country going in the other direction? It's weird, isn't it? Why would the United Kingdom appear to be, according to all of the opinion polls, moving leftwards? Now, admittedly, Keir Starmer has, if you like, moved into uncharted territory for a Labour leader when it comes to talking about... Well, no, he hasn't actually, because Ed Miliband did the same thing. They've been promising to bring immigration down for almost as long as the Tories have. But they don't do it with that sort of nativist snarl that people who dream of planes taking off full of asylum seekers deploy. But it is a little odd, given that we have very, very right-wing media in this country. Don't forget that the Daily Mail back in the day was publishing articles by its owner under the headline, "Hurrah for the Black Shirts." And the same owner, in fact, the same man, was exchanging warm words with senior members of the Nazi Party almost up to the outbreak of the Second World War. And there's a certain relish in how the Daily Mail covers this story today. Again, Andrew Neil, of course, who published a paean to the Waffen-SS by a journalist called Taki. He is here writing under the headline, "On everything from net zero to wokery and immigration, Starmer will be way out of step with his beloved EU." These people are just weird. We've left the EU. I mean, our interest in what happens there should be commensurately diminished until it seems they, quotes, lurch, end quotes, to the far right, in which case, presumably, Brexiteers are queuing up to kick themselves. I don't know. I mean, what you've left, it's a far right parliament and we've left it? How did that happen? So what I want to know from you today is why this is happening. If there's anything beyond don't like foreigners, too many immigrants, I would be particularly interested to hear it. If there isn't anything beyond that, why is it landing now so well? Why is it nudging needles, swinging pendula so effectively now? And why do you think it's not happening here? Why do you think we have a move? And listen, I don't care what you think about Keir Starmer in the context of this question, because he's clearly to the left of Rishi Sunak's Tory party, even if he's nowhere near to the left of centre enough for you. You cannot argue with the simple observation that he's to the left of Rishi Sunak. And that seems to me to be quite surprising. I would have thought, given the attention that we've paid to people who are far right, or certainly very comfortable hanging out with the far right, I would have thought we might have been more vulnerable. Certainly looking at our media, we might have been more vulnerable, more susceptible to these nativist snarls than some of our European counterparts. I need to, before I throw open the phone lines, I need to stress one thing. I'm pretty good at British politics. I'm pretty good at, I presumably occasionally even take you by surprise with some nugget of knowledge that you weren't aware of. I am embarrassingly poor at European politics. I played catch up for years, but I don't know stuff that you, sitting in Denmark or Germany or Austria or France, you might think is bleeding obvious. But this, remember, is a primer for British listeners who are confused, particularly, I think, in the shadow of the D-Day commemorations, although you might not like that juxtaposition. For me, it's very pertinent and very powerful. Looking at these votes in the immediate aftermath of the D-Day commemorations, to me, makes them doubly chilling, even though the numbers aren't as shocking as some people predicted, and as some right-wing outlets in this country are sort of reporting a sense of relish that isn't really justified by the numbers. The direction of traffic should concern us, because these are the forces that we fought against in the Second World War. These are the forces of othering minorities, of hierarchies of humanity. The circumstances of your birth or the accident of geography somehow renders you superior or inferior to another person. These are the forces that we, and I use the word loosely, that we fought against. And two things seem to be happening. They seem to be on the rise, and some corners of our media seem to be relishing it. So what is going on? 0345 6060 973.